This session is our sixth session in a Reversing Diabetes seminar. We are talking about epigenetics, optimizing diabetes reversal. Genetics got its start with a man named Grigor Mendel. He was actually a monk. And as he was working in his monastery garden raising peas, crossing and breeding them, he began to notice the certain patterns and characteristics that happened with the plants, certain inheritable traits that could be passed to different generations. And that started the science of genetics. We know now that we inherit half of our genes from our father and half of our genes from our mother. And if I inherited diabetes from one of my parents, I'm asked the question a lot of time, how can I prevent or reverse something that was passed down to me genetically? Well, that's a very good question. But let's first of all identify a couple myths that are out there. You were dealt a hand of genes at your birth. You are who you are, and there's nothing you can do to change that. We know that that is absolutely not true anymore. Oh, sure, it's true for some inheritable traits. We don't know how to change eye color at this point in time, but there are a lot of genes which are not like eye color. They actually can be influenced by their environment. We are a very adaptable organism. If the environment changes, the expression of our genes change to help us to be able to adapt and survive. Another myth, I have to accept what destiny was handed to me. No, I don't. Not in this day and age, not with what we know. So we have learned a lot. All diseases have a genetic component. But I have often wondered, what kind of genetic component is there to diabetes? And how true is it that you have genes that determine your fate? Well, consider this. You can have identical twins. They have exactly the same genetic component. One of them can have develop cancer, while the other one remains cancer-free. One of them can remain lean, while the other one becomes obese. One can develop diabetes, and the other one be diabetes-free. How do we account for that when there's a genetic component there? And the answer to that lies in a new science that's probably about 10 years old now, and it's called epigenetics. Epi means on top of or in addition to, and genetics means, of course, the factors that affect the way that our genes work. So epigenetics refers then to factors that affect the way the genes work independent of the genes themselves. Time magazine first reported this in a public way on January 6, 2010. And it was in an article, Why Your DNA Isn't Your Destiny. In the genomic research lab at Duke University, Randy Girdle headed up a program in which they looked at agouti mice. Now, these agouti mice are little yellow mice instead of brown mice, and they will rapidly gain weight, and early in their life they will develop diabetes and heart disease, and they will die prematurely of cancer. It's just one of the nature of these mice. And so they were trying to see, can we change the agouti gene if we feed these mice a special nutritional supplement? And so they tried, and actually the offspring were normal. Now if you look here, this is a picture of an agouti mouse. And typically, when the agouti mice are bred, most of the offspring are identical to the parents, just as yellow, fat as pincushions, and susceptible to life-shortening disease. The parent mice in the Girdle and Waterland's experiment, however, produced a majority of offspring that looked altogether different. These young mice were slender and mousy brown. Moreover, they did not display their parents' susceptibility to cancer and diabetes and lived to a spry old age. the effects of the agouti gene had been virtually erased. Remarkably, the researchers effected this transformation without altering a single letter of the mouse's DNA. Their approach was was radically straightforward. They changed the mom's diet. The most important point is that as the diet changed toward the innate diet from mice, the genetically congruent diet from mice, the genetic expression changed toward normal and healthy. No cancer, no diabetes, and no early death. As the diet of the mice became more sufficient and less toxic, the genetic expression normalized to healthy. It was a toxic, deficient diet that caused the agouti gene to be expressed in the first place. So lessons learned. It was the same genes, but different expressions. The diet changed the way the genes work and actually deactivated that agouti gene. Gene expressions can also be effectuated in other species as well. So you play an active role in how your genes are expressed. I run into people all the time that say, well, it really doesn't matter what I do. The way I look at it, the good Lord's going to pull your number anytime He pulls your number. And, you know, it doesn't matter what you got to do, you got to die sometime. Well, in actuality, science teaches us very clearly that it does matter what you do. What you do, in fact, affects your lifespan in very significant ways. And you can impact your quality of life. You can impact the length of your lifespan. And I think that becomes biblical as well if you want to carry on the argument, because the Lord made you a steward. He made you to be a steward of your life, to be responsible for the life that He's given you, to take the best care of it. You know, what the Bible says, what? Don't you know your body is the temple of the Holy Ghost? So if you want to carry on the argument, let's carry it on to its full conclusion. You're responsible for what God gave you. Are you being responsible enough to take care of the resources He's given you? Well, let's look actually at what happens to genes in people populations. The Pima Indians are well known, especially among those people who do diabetic research, because they happen to have the highest instance of diabetes in their population of any people group in the world. You can see people from China, Polynesian islands, the Cook Islands, Hispanic people in the U.S., blacks, whites, all kinds of different people groups, and they have varying degrees of diabetes until you get to the Pima Indians, and their instance of diabetes is far up and above what anybody else is. Their genes are active at work, and they appear to be, on the surface, to be just victims of circumstance. There's nothing that they can do to change their genes, or not. Let's see. Most of the Pima Indians, they actually are Native American Indians that lived in the region of Arizona around the Salt and Gila rivers up near Phoenix. And then there happens to be another group of Pima who have an identical genome, who live in the Sierra Madre Mountains in Mexico. Now, the history of the Pima goes something like this. They are mainly an agricultural people. For thousands of years, they have worked the land. And around the time of Western expansion, people began to move into Arizona, and they began to plant gardens and crops upstream from the Pima. When they did that, they began diverting the water that the Pima had used to irrigate their crops with for many, many years. What happened as a result of that is famine set in, and many of the Pima became very thin, emaciated. Yes, many of them died as well of starvation. these people then, because of their of dying of hunger, they were actually forced to survive on United States commodities. These commodities included flour, white flour, sugar, and lard. And it was about that time that the obesity needle began to move a little for these people. Then in World War II, a lot of these men were conscripted into the army. They joined the army, mainly Caucasian units, and they began to eat what the standard American diet was. After the war was over, they took that standard American diet home with them. And as the people began to morph to eating those kinds of foods, as they changed their lifestyle, then the rate of diabetes just skyrocketed. Now, those that live in the Sierra Madre Mountains, however, have continued to farm the way that they have farmed for thousands of years. They remain a lean, slender people, and they have almost no diabetes. So the question is, if the researchers tell us that the genome is exactly the same, what is it that has actually caused those around the Salt and Gila River in Arizona to develop such rip-roaring diabetes when those Pima Indians with the same genome who live in the Sierra Madre Mountains have none? There must be something that has caused them to turn on their gene for diabetes, just as there was something in the mouse that caused the mouse to turn on its agouti gene and become yellow and fat and have diabetes and heart disease and die early of cancer. There's another lesson. It was a prostate cancer study which was done by Dean Ornish. Now, those of you that are read up on medical type literature know that Dean Ornish did a landmark study back in the 1990s when he discovered that you could actually reverse cardiovascular disease by putting people on a strict diet of plant-based foods, low fat and low protein, and exercise and meditation. When he envisioned the prostate cancer study, he said, well, what would happen to the genes of these people in this study if we took men and enrolled them in the study who have prostate cancer? And I want the men that have declined traditional treatment, men who are well along with their cancer growth. So he took these men, 30 men, he enrolled them in a 3-month lifestyle program, and he fashioned it very similar to how he fashioned his original program for cardiovascular disease. He said, we'll put them on a plant-based diet, we'll engage them in moderate exercise, we're going to do stress management with them, and we will have weekly support groups meetings with them to keep them on track. So they did this for 90 days. Now, at the beginning of the study, their goal was to see if lifestyle changes could actually effectuate gene expression. And the results of the study were that the men lost weight, they lowered their blood pressure, lowered their cholesterol, but they also had major epigenetic changes. What they did before the study began was they actually did testing on this. Now, you may recall that it was back during the 1990s, roughly, that President Clinton put the researchers on a path to unravel the human genome. It was a project that was supposed to take 60 years. Instead of taking 60 years, they finished it within, I think it was just 13 years. So since we have unraveled the human genome in the early part of this century, we have been identifying genes which cause disease. And so at the time of the study, Dr. Ornish tested each one of these men for 453 genes, which at that time were known to promote disease, and all of those were found to be active. He also tested for 48 genes which were known to prevent disease, and every one of those, in every one of the cases of the case subjects, they were found to be inactive. After the 90 days on the program, they repeated their genetic testing. All 453 genes that were known to promote disease were tested, and all were found to have now become inactive. All 48 genes that were disease-preventing genes were tested, and every one of these were found to be active. Something happened in the genetic expression of all 30 of these men that caused them actually to do a flip-flop. They felt better. Their tumors had actually, in many cases, shrunk. We know from this experience that lifestyle changes turned off the bad genes and turned on the good genes. So there is hope for battling genetic predispositions. The actual impact that your genes have on your diabetes have been estimated by some researchers to be as little as 3 to 5%. That means that the other factors that have caused your diabetes are environmental factors or lifestyle factors. Genes may have given you a genetic predisposition, but the lifestyle that you have lived is actually what has caused you to be sick. So the implications may reach into many areas of our life. Lifestyle changes rapidly affect genetic expression. So the best approach is to try to optimize your genetic potential. Researchers have tried to unravel the mechanism by which this happens. And one possible mechanism might be something they call methylation. Another one is histone tail modification. There's a little protein that the gene can wrap around, and when it wraps around and binds it up tight like this, then that gene becomes inactive. But there are things that you can do to make these unwind, and when you do, then the gene can be expressed. So what we want to do is see if there's anything out there that epigenetics research has told us that we can do to help you optimize your epigenetic potential and turn off your diabetes genes. In 2008, the National Institutes of Health saw great potential in this epigenetic research, and they allocated at that time over $190 million to be spent over 5 years in epigenetic research. And that has uncovered a lot of changes. In March 14 of 2014, Charlotte Ling, one of the researchers at Lund University, reported that they have identified over 800 genes which cause type 2 diabetes. And she says that they can be influenced in different ways through diet, exercise, and lifestyle modifications. So to bring about these epigenetic changes, we need to, we can modify the actual activation of certain genes, but we don't change the DNA sequence. They are all preserved when the cell divides. They occur within one organism's lifetime, but they can occasionally be passed on to offspring, as for instance what we saw with the Grundy gene. The implications for that means that we need to do widespread education. We don't need to wait until somebody has had 20 years to develop the diabetes disease. We need to teach our children and our grandchildren before they have the disease that they need to make these changes in their lives so that they can prevent getting the disease and so that they can hopefully pass along some of these characteristics to their offspring. DNA damage is common. Mutations occur as much as 10,000 times in a particular cell in the course of the day. The body is constantly building and rebuilding its genome. But the damage is activated through oxidative stress pathways. So we need to look first to minimizing oxidative stress as a way to optimizing our epigenetic potential. We talked about that in our previous lecture. Deficiencies in the DNA are taken care of by repair genes. You can have mutations which occur, and these things can cause genome instability. Once you get genome instability, then you have the onset of cancers and things of that nature. So if we can repair the genes, bring them back to where they ought to be, the cell will function at its optimal limit, and things like cancers and hypertension and heart disease will be minimized because the cell is operating well. We know that antioxidant-rich foods will increase the levels of DNA repair enzymes, and they will reduce the amount of DNA damage. Therefore, if we're going to optimize our potential, we need to concentrate on filling our diet full of those foods that we've already identified, which are high in the antioxidants. In 2009, Australian researchers identified that one sugar hit may change epigenetic structure for 2 weeks. So if you eat that real high sugary diet, if you go out and binge on a banana split, or decide it's your time to eat the half of the chocolate cake, or you down a bunch of sugary drinks, one hit can last for 2 weeks. So the changes that you see are not immediately forgotten. The body holds on to them. So it switches off controls that prevent heart disease and diabetes from a sugar hit. There was another researcher that discovered that regular poor eating practices means the damage could last for months or years. So you can't expect that these changes are going to occur, reverse overnight, although some of them can reverse rather rapidly, and the harder you work at it, the more that you can make that happen. You can actually push this process. The real problems linked with unhealthy diet are postponed until later in life. But the same professor said, L. Osta, he said, this is not all doom and gloom. We think that there is good epigenetic memory as well for individuals who have a good diet, not only for themselves, but potentially for future generations. So what are we waiting for? It's time to make the change, to bring in the program that we've talked to you about, because it's been structured to optimize your epigenetic potential and change the way that your genes actually will express themselves. In the year 1900 in our country, there was one diabetic, or excuse me, there were 2 diabetics for every 1,000 in the population. The prevalence of diabetes in 2013 had risen to 120 diabetics for every 1,000 in the population, 60 times what it previously was. And it's projected that by 2030, it's going to be 240 for every 1,000 in the population. Very seriously, we need to make some big changes in our lifestyle if we are going to survive the next 15, 20 years. But apparently, something has triggered epigenetic change. For diabetes to make this kind of change as is projected, it cannot be related to genes that your parents passed on to you. It has to be something that changed in the expression that has caused the increase of the disease. Dr. Francis Collins was he's the current director of the National Institutes of Health in Washington, and he was the former director of the Human Genome Project. And he made this statement. He says, genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. Genetics loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. So the big question is, how do I optimize my epigenetic potential? Well, you optimize your potential through food. That is your most powerful resource, and it's the most critical. Change what you eat, and then increase your activity. This actually protects the brain. By increasing physical activity, by engaging in exercise, you are producing those antioxidants which help your body deal with the free radicals that are there. You're slowing the oxidative stress problem by eating foods that are loaded in those antioxidants and phytonutrients. You're neutralizing free radicals. You're decreasing the inflammation that's in the body. And also engage in cognitive activity, activities that require thinking. Learn more about your health, because your future health depends to a great degree on nutrients over calories. See your food classification list. Pull that out and review it again. Study your one-day plan. Over a period of a few days to a few weeks, you will learn that plan so that it comes as second nature to you. And then focus on the reversal strategy that you've been given. Remember, it's especially the foods in these top 3 categories that are loaded so well with those antioxidants that are going to help you optimize your epigenetic potential. And pull out your one-day plan. Make sure that you're getting the balance of nutrition that you need, that has been proven to work in hundreds and even thousands of other individuals. You can make changes in your life. So think about your SMART goals. Did you take time to write them out? You know, unless you've planned, how are you going to get where you're going? I'm reminded of Alice in Wonderland. She goes along and she meets the Cheshire Cat, and she says, "Which way shall I go?" And the cat asks her, "Well, where are you going?" And she answers, "Well, I don't much know." So he says, "Well, I don't guess it much matters." So do you know where you're going? Have you decided what you want to do with your future health? Write out those goals, then review them on a daily basis. Is it worth it to you to make the change for better health? Well, you evaluate it. Would you like to be like Steve? Steve was a gentleman who works at the hospital where I work. When he heard that I was teaching a reversing diabetes program, he came to me and said, "Steve, tell me how I can reverse my diabetes." He says, "I don't have time to go to your seminar. I can't fit it into the schedule. It won't work for me on the day that you have it." But he says, "I really get it. I'll sit down. I'll do what you say." Steve had had diabetes for about 15 years. He had terrible neuropathy pain in his hands, but especially in his feet. He had angina every day as he's pushing the diet cart down the hallway. His chest would burn, but he wouldn't tell his family because he didn't want them to know. Within 3 weeks, 3 weeks of being on the program, Steve's angina went away. Now, the reason for that is probably because the diet that he had changed to was lower in fat. There was less blood sludge, and he still had blocked arteries, but the blood's moving freely through his arteries now, and so he's not experiencing the angina. If he sticks with the program for well over a year and is really faithful at keeping with the program, I anticipate that his cardiovascular disease will actually go away. About 6 weeks after I had met with Steve and explained the program to him, he came back to me and said, "Steve, you won't believe how I'm feeling." And he went on to explain that his neuropathy pain was just almost completely gone. He says, "I have a little burning in the big toe of my left foot, and just a little bit in one spot on my right foot. But," he says, "I'm hardly hurting at all. It's nothing like what it used to be." Well, most of your doctors will tell you that neuropathy pain is irreversible. But here's one example of where it actually was reversed. He was beginning to experience epigenetic changes in his body. And these epigenetic changes, these higher levels of antioxidants that he was taking in his body, was actually allowing his body to heal itself. It's not something the doctor can do with a medicine, but it's something that you can do with lifestyle change. Is it worth it for you to make the change for better health? Another thing that might help is partnering with somebody. Explain to somebody else, maybe even somebody who has diabetes, that you need some help making these changes in your life. Ask them to be your buddy. Ask them to help you make these changes. Perhaps you can become telephone buddies. When you're having that urge to really pig out on a sugar binge, call them up. Let them talk to them. Sit down and watch this series together. Affirm together that you want to make these changes in your life. Help somebody else out. And then find out if your family's willing to help you make the change. Are they willing to try a new recipe occasionally? Maybe put one in on them every now and then. Right at first you may have some disasters, but don't worry. You're going to find some that you really enjoy, and your tastes are going to begin changing as well. You won't even miss your old way of life once you start feeling better. I guarantee it.